Welcome back to Any Voices. Today's episode is all about clarity in learning, assessment, and feedback, and how that clarity can fundamentally change the way students experience school. In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Mielke, teacher and administrator, who's been using Clarify Ed to rethink how learning intentions, success criteria, and assessment all fit together in his health science class. What started as a tool for better alignment quickly became something much more powerful. Students taking ownership of their learning, asking better questions, and approaching assessments with confidence instead of anxiety. Dan shares a moment that captures this shift perfectly. After an exam where students performed exceptionally well, he asked if it felt easy. One student replied, "Yeah, but not because it was easy, but because the review made it easy." That single sentence says it all. This conversation isn't about making learning easier. It's about making expectations visible, feedback meaningful, and learning transferable. If you've ever wondered how clarity can transform assessment and empower students as learners, this is the episode for you. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to Northeast Voices, a podcast that spotlights the innovators and change makers in education. We're here to share the stories of inclusion, empowerment, and the impactful connections with the Northeast School Division and beyond, focusing on the pivotal role of students, families, and teachers. Join us as we dive into the conversations revealing the strategies and moments shaping the future of education. Any Voices is your platform for inspiration and connection, and is recorded in the Northeast School Division, sharing the land of Treaties 4, 5, 6, and homeland of the Métis in Northeast Saskatchewan. Be sure to subscribe and join our community of innovators and change makers. Let's get started. Welcome back to a mini moment with Dan Mielke. Here we're talking on Any Voices about using the tool Clarify Ed, which some of our teachers are using to help improve the clarity in the classroom, get live feedback from students, and help to put that into feeding forward into deeper thinking in the classroom. And so you were sharing the other day, we were on a call and you were talking about students preparing for an assessment and how you were using the information from Clarify Ed to help improve that process and flow even more smoothly, to the point where you wondered, I think, what did you say to me? Was it challenging enough? Was
Yeah,
the assessment challenging enough? Because they all did really, really well, which is what we
yeah,
ultimately want. So it's kind of funny that that's the moment where we're like, wait, did that align? But always good to think about, what is the alignment? How does everything flow through from start to not necessarily finish, but to that checkpoint? So I'll turn it over to you to give us a little bit of the background on that story.
sure. So, yeah, I've been using the Clarify Ed tool for a little while now. And so definitely throughout my health science, I've been building using that tool to build the success criteria and the lesson-based learning intentions. So those really granular 1 to 2 lesson learning intentions flowing out of the outcome-based learning intentions, the broader ones. And so throughout our unit, we are constantly referencing, as the Clarity Ed team says, learning intentions and success criteria shouldn't be one and done. They should be referenced regularly. And so I often use them to frame our learning for the day, or we'll stop partway through a lesson and come back and sort of reflect where we're at. So the kids are quite familiar with the success criteria. And as I was prepping some of my exam reviews going into this year, it kind of made sense that to line them up with those success criteria that Clarity Ed is giving. One, because it's a great learning progression, and two, the students were quite familiar. So my initial run at it, I literally took the Clarity Ed success criteria along with the sort of the examples that are there and gave that to them. And they found some use of that, but they right away said, like, this is hard for us to really to utilize. What do you mean by this? And so then I started generating some the next round, version 2.0, was I might ask questions about diagrams here, or this might be where I ask you questions about defining a term or connecting terms. And they thought that was good. They were happy. But it was actually a student who said, if it's not too much, would you be able to give us even some sample questions that you might ask? And I thought, well, that's totally fair. And so the final version now actually has the success criteria, and then beside it, it has, this is an example of a question that might literally appear on the exam, including the diagrams I might use. So the kids know that it's not an exhaustive list. So it's not that every question on the exam is going to come from the review, or that every question on the review will be used on the exam. They're aware of that. We talk as we do our review, and it's a really powerful way to review is we'll look at, like, the question might be, what's the role of progesterone in pregnancy? And then
Right.
we'll talk about how, like, I could flip any of the hormones that we talked about into that. Or more recently, it might be compare the difference between a complex and a simple carbohydrate in terms of structure. And I'll say, like, but we could easily flip function into that question. Or we could talk about simple proteins and complex protein structures. And so the nice thing is it gives them a starting point, but lots of them now
Mhm.
are actually using AI to generate their own exam questions based on that, right? So they'll feed the review in and then ask it to generate exam questions. So the last two exams, the marks have been really, really well done. The student success has been really good. I'm seeing a lot of some of the lower level questions are where they're making their errors, and they're really nailing the higher end questions now, right? Because they're able to prep for those a little more. And
Nice.
so my last test, I actually said to the kids, I said, like, be honest, did you find this test easy? And one of the students said, yeah, but not because it was easy, because the review made it easier. And students are coming up, not everybody, I mean, it's not the perfect world where every student's getting 100, but the ones who aren't are fully admitting that they're not using the review or they're not using it as much. So it's been really successful. I'll stick with it. They
Mhm.
like it because it also, when they come and ask me a question, it's not, I don't get carbohydrates. It's, okay, I understand up to level 3. I'm not sure what this means at
Mhm.
level 4. And then we can talk through, oh, that's what we're talking. We can really focus during our review time on that. So side effect is, I'll come in and say the day before an exam, hey, we've got 20 minutes of work today, but then you're welcome to use the rest of the time to prepare for your exam if you'd like. Historically, it would have been, yeah, we'll sit here and study. Now it is, no, let's actively engage with these sample questions and the review. So I am doing a lot more back and forth talking and dialogue now during the review, where
Mhm.
before it was maybe a one or two questions. Now we're doing 40, 45 minutes of us interacting back and forth and talking. So that's, like I say, it's been really successful from what I've seen. There's the check-in piece of Clarity Ed. I'm seeing improvement there as well, just because they're getting better at connecting success criteria to actual evidence of learning, that's been the big powerful thing.
And I think you circled back to that a few times when you talked about we brainstorm what type of evidence. Would this be a visual that you're looking at and then you're identifying pieces and talking about how they're interacting together? Is it a question where and then you're digging into not only the evidence, but the types of questions? So, how are we thinking about it? And you're also looking at the verbs, right? Is it a function? Is it an identifying? Is it a comparing between these two? If it's comparing, what are the different factors or components that we would be comparing? So, it's a shift in the conversation using the content to help think more deeply about it, to think about it from different perspectives. And you're spearheading that using the learning progressions. In Clarify Ed, I would put in a learning intention. It helps me to refine it. It will generate the learning progression and it gives criteria for each of those different levels. And it talks about at a 1, 2, or 3, you might see this. Here might be some of those pieces that we're talking about. And I think you highlighted in the first one, that's what students used. Then that leveled up into a little bit more conversation and some examples. And then what's exciting to hear is when they have time to interact rather than they're just kind of reading through or recopying their notes, they're actually thinking about what types of questions might I ask? If I made this claim, how would I back that up with certain types of evidence? And that I think you've talked before about the check in helps them to not only read carefully and to think about what is the question asking, but also what's the evidence and how do I know that I know what that is. So regardless of whether it's health science or they went to math or they went to chemistry or into a social studies class, all of those ideas of thinking about what types of questions and how do I respond to it and what evidence would make sense, all are skills that they need. So it definitely makes the process easier. You've engaged students in their learning. Would you say their sense of agency is increasing in that because they're engaging more deeply in that review, which is a shift from perhaps in the past? They know that what they're investing is actually coming back to them when they go to demonstrate their understanding?
Yeah, and I see that in their confidence, absolutely. An example on the last exam, it was on human reproduction. And so, I mean, in Clarity Ed, they put it in 5 levels. And really level 5 is often what can go wrong or what happens when
Mhm,
things don't go as planned. So in this exam, we had talked about the idea of, and several times throughout the unit, I mean, like I said, we're referencing these success criteria as we're learning, as we're
mhm.
doing those formatives and summative pieces throughout, not just the final summative either. We talked a lot about hormonal disruptions and the idea of how do you explain that? And it's not just oh, well, it doesn't work, but we actually need to walk backwards. And we say, well, this affected this, so then this affected this. And so we'd spend a lot of time on cause and effect. Really exciting though on the exam, hardest question on the exam, and I was really upfront with them about it. It
Mhm.
was a male hormonal birth control. And what it was I gave them the two hormones that'll be included,
Right.
and the expectation is they had to tell me why. And they did an awesome job because it was there. One of the hormones is testosterone. Pretty quick answer for them. That one was the not too tough. But then they were able to work backwards because we'd worked through the success criteria and evidencing learning. They did a fantastic job of connecting it backwards. And what was really great is so many of them said, based on what I know about the female reproductive system, I'm going to take a leap of knowledge, right? And we call it a leap of knowledge in class. So it's like
Mhm.
you're going to take a risk because you don't know it, but you have a pretty good idea because of what you do know. And so I was, you never know going in how an exam question's going to go.
Mhm.
I sort of had in my brain, you always landmark where the marks are, how you'll know what level they're at. So if I see this, I'll know they're put that MM. And then if I see this, they're moving into FM and then in EU. And like they knocked it out of the park. They were
Yeah.
starting off with the EU piece, which was really, yeah. So really power, like I say, the confidence to answer that question, no hesitation, right? They started right out with three of them were like, based on what I know about the female reproductive system.
Mhm.
Well, when you're answering a question about a male hormonal birth control and you're confident enough to say, I know this connects, that was a big
Yeah.
win for me. I was pretty excited to see that.
Well, and you talked about going back to the success criteria so they know what evidence they're working on. They're making connections and referencing their prior knowledge to give you a context of how they're putting it together. So they're really making that learning visible and helping not only helping us as teachers to see that, but helping themselves to kind of see that progression. Like you talked about, we worked backwards through those different pieces. Here's my curiosity question for you. When you're in that review and you're going back and forth, you're having those conversations throughout that lesson or working on that outcome-based success criteria because the in Clarify Ed, the levels, the what do we call them? The progression,
Learning
the
progression.
learning progression is more granular than where we would talk about with the outcome-based success criteria. So in Saskatchewan, we would say we have outcomes from the ministry. We've developed rubrics in the Northeast School Division. We've unpacked the outcomes, and then we're working on digging into the outcome-based success criteria. So what are the must-do, can't fails that are those key pieces inside of the larger outcome? What are those success criteria that we can clearly communicate to the students? And we know that there's a lot loaded into different outcomes in Saskatchewan, depending whether PAA courses might be a little more straightforward, but a health science course often has that the outcome is very deep and has a lot in it. So there's different outcome-based success criteria that go with it. And you're taking that one and then breaking that down using Clarify Ed as a tool to say, like, in the next couple of days, these are the key things that before I leave class, I should be able to be confident in that. And if I'm not, that's a sign that I can engage with my teacher and ask questions and check that out, and I can help my learning progression all the way along. And then all of those go back to the bigger picture there. But I like how you're talking about making those connections, putting them all together, and you're also talking about them all the way through. So during that review, here's my curiosity and my wonder is when you're having those back and forth conversations, do you have evidence that's coming up that student can confidently do that outcome-based success criteria? I was able to be in a conversation with these. I observed these students having that conversation. So in the future, might an exam look like, here were the conversations we had over the last little bit that I was observing and I was engaging in. I've seen that you have these success criteria. So these would probably be on the exam, these might be the questions you could challenge at that point. I maybe don't need to see all of these because I already have that. Is that a possible area that it might evolve into in the future?
For sure. Definitely. We've been talking about that with the Clarity Ed check-ins too, is if like yesterday for the first time I had a student identify themselves at a level 5 and successfully AI agreed that they were
Nice.
in fact at a level 5. And I'm not even that perfect. I think level 4 is a really good place
Yes.
to land. And so what I have said to the students is if I'm confident you were at a level 4 or a level 5, yeah, it may very well be a quick conversation or not. Like I said, depending what we've talked about. On the one exam, I actually said this to a student. She dominated the review process just because she A had lots of answers and B had lots of really good questions. And so we talked about, like I said, I predict you will do extremely well. And I was
Mhm.
right. So yeah, like in the back of my brain, I'm like, how do we bypass step two, which is the writing of the exam, and then me having to
Yes.
mark it, right?
Yes.
So that is definitely on my brain. And we've made the deal with Clarity Ed that if you're willing to demonstrate and show me that evidence in there, I don't necessarily see a reason why. The student yesterday, we were doing carbohydrates and
Oh,
said like she was at a 5 and she is at a 5. Yeah, going forward, does that mean that's a check mark on it? So she's not doing that portion of the assessment or yeah. So it's a matter of, what connections has she made? If I'm comfortable with those connections, then, is she having to do the in-class assessment? Is she having to do the project? Yeah, that's all stuff definitely I'm going to be toying with going forward. It's some students really still struggle with evidencing their learning. I still get a lot of
yes.
the like yesterday, for example, a student, and she, with permission, I shared it with the class. She put herself at a 3, it scored her at a 0. When we pulled up her answer, it said, "Well, I can tell you the basic stuff about carbohydrates, but I would need my notes to tell you more complex things." And so my comment to her was like, if you had just told me what those basic things are,
Yes.
probably for sure you'd be at a 3. Even better yet, if you'd have told me about the complex things you think you don't understand, I think we
Yes.
probably would have got you higher, right? So there's been a lot of growth with some students who are very comfortable to say, yeah, I can tell you the difference between a complex and a simple carbohydrate, and here's how I
Mhm.
do that. Some are still at the place where, yeah, I could tell you that. And that's so we've got some work to do for everyone, but yeah, there's a growing group of students who, whether or not they'll have to write that assessment is pretty up in the air.
And I think it's interesting that you're engaging in those conversations with students. So they're starting to actively think, well, if I could show you this, what else could I show you? Do I need to show you on that piece? I'm curious about how the routine in the classroom might evolve. So you talked about having that review process. So maybe there's a kind of a review or a pause kind of before you hit that assessment, which maybe doesn't become the exam, but a more of a chance to redemonstrate or to challenge specific areas of that. And that in between space would be I have evidence from this lab that we did, and I have this here, and I could share. Or if as a student I came to you and said, these are the outcome-based success criteria I think I can pull it, or I have pulled it together in this. I've engaged in these conversations. Do we agree? And if we do, then these parts of the assessment tomorrow might be what I work on, or actually congratulations, you've demonstrated everything that we need to see. Maybe yours is, I am fully proficient or at an FM level for us in the Northeast School Division. Maybe I want to go beyond and show you what enriched looks like, or I'm curious about how something else might work. The other thing I think is interesting is you talked about the questions that we're asking and how not only the evidence that the student gave was helpful, but the questions that they asked are also really telling of how they're processing their thinking. And how do we learn how to evidence our learning, which we need as a life skill, right? If somebody makes a point about something, the question is always like, how do you know that? And what's your evidence of it?
Yeah, and kind of stepping back to the outcome based, your planning and your feedback really change as you start to use these tools. As you were saying that, I was thinking like absolutely for some of my students, if I think back to the human reproduction system unit, we did a project on the female reproduction cycle. And then at the end of it, there was an assessment. And I had a student who missed. She was away on a big family trip. And so I said, like, you are more than welcome to just write the assessment. I said, or the final exam is always a redemonstration opportunity for
Right.
me. It's never cumulative. They get to pick what they want to improve. And her comment was, well, no, because if I do the project and the unit exam and the final, that's more opportunity for you to give me feedback. And that made me reflect on my feedback. And so I found that my feedback is tied into success criteria more so than it is the product, which wasn't
Yeah.
intentional, but I guess sort of a necessary move. I gave them this project, which was a comic strip, and then we moved into a little bit of a more formal exam. And the feedback I gave on the comic strip was very connected to the success criteria. So when they ran into that question on the exam, it was usable feedback, right? So there was, I mean, I know
Yeah.
we aren't doing the use more glitter or make sure you, but I mean, we
Yeah.
still are task specific feedback a little bit whereas my feedback was very, I remember one piece of feedback I gave a few times is, can you show me the connection between this hormone and this hormone in the overall process? And then more importantly, can you do the reverse connection when we get to the what can go wrong part? So I really tried
Yes.
to use the language out of the success criteria and the natural progression. And so I did use language like to show me a more enriched understanding. to show our higher level of proficiency, or I think you need to work on this to move into proficiency. The students did share that feedback helped them on the exam. And so with the students saying, no, I want more opportunities for feedback, it was a huge celebration, but then also made me very aware of I need to make sure that feedback is useful. So, saying to them, oh, you only made 5 of the 6 panels is pretty useless feedback.
Yes.
Whereas, hey, you were missing this information better. But even the best way now is to move into a more proficient level. I need to see, and then really hitting those verbs from the learning progression so that then it drives them into a conversation. So they can't just be, oh, so I just need to fill in 2 more points. It's no, well, what do you mean make a connection? Or I'll have students come up and say, I don't understand what you mean by what's the reciprocal connection? And then we can have that
Right.
discussion.
Which changes the conversation from, "Oh, I missed putting a unit on the question, so I lost a half a mark," to, "I'm more interested in how like, which things am I connecting?" Or one point, and I know we talked in the past about an example where a student did a fantastic job of explaining something about the cell theory, but had mislinked one of the scientists that she was talking about. But once you gave her the opportunity to reflect back and see that and relate it to sometimes we make assumptions or we do that and our reasoning makes sense, but we missed a connection early on. So the more that they're assessing and reflecting and analyzing their own thinking, the better able they are to respond to that. And you're engaging them in a different type of conversation than I listed 3 things or 5 things rather than, if I link this hormone to this, what does that do to the body? How does this external influence impact what's going on? And if we think about lifelong learning skills and broad areas of learning, problem solving is one of those competencies that's valuable for all of us, right? We're always a little bit of a detective in life. This isn't working. Can we track it back and figure out what it is? And all of the content is just one way that we move through those thinking processes and things with students. But I think it's really interesting that students are asking for more feedback. And that's what they're most interested in, not, this was the mark, but I would like more feedback so I can continue to grow and improve, which is the ultimate goal for education to
Well,
have engaged students.
well, and an exciting thing happened yesterday. So, I mean, as we are piloting the tool, so part of our work is
Yes.
not just how does it benefit kids, but we need to provide feedback about the tool. And so we've been studying complex carbohydrates. And so they were doing their check-in yesterday, and a student said to me, I'm using the word hexagon, but she said, I forget what is the hexagon. She said, I know what it is, but like what word could I use? And I said, well, let's test the tool. I
Right.
want you to use the word hexagon. I said, the answer you're looking for is monosaccharide or simple sugar. But I said, please use the word hexagon because I want to see what the program does with it. I said,
Right.
you and I now both know. And to me, that was that quick feedback that's important, but it's sort of like Covey's quadrants, right? It's important, but not
Yep.
super meaningful. And so she did. And I was super impressed. The AI also realized it was important, but not meaningful. And so in her feedback, it referenced, I think you mean this, but then throughout the rest of the feedback actually used the word hexagons, right? So that
So
the
it always
feedback
gave her
tied
the
back to
connection.
her. Yeah. And but
That
it
that's
was an
pretty
aha
cool.
moment for me that like, is it important she understands the hexagon is glucose or a simple sugar? Yes. But do I want to bog her down with that and then the rest of the feedback become meaningless? No. So it was a cool conversation, right? And just to be honest, a conversation I probably wouldn't have had. Looking back how I mark on a test, I would have circled hexagon and probably wrote simple sugar above it.
Right.
Um, but it's something to think about when you're giving feedback, right? It was an aha for me around what's important feedback. Like, yes, she needs to know the hexagon's glucose, but the meaningful feedback is that yes, you have actually done because her answer went on to talk
Mhm.
about enzymes breaking single hexagons off and multiple branch points in glycogen make it a rapid sugar release. That's what I care about.
Yes.
Because I mean, I always tell the students what's Googleable, right? Can you Google
Yeah.
what the hexagon is? For sure. Can you Google what you
Yep.
just told me? Not really. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a neat moment. And the student was 100% on board and was realizing that like we're having another go at this, which is a big thing in Clarity Ed too,
Yes.
right? The second go. So I said, like going forward, yeah, monosaccharide or simple sugar would be a
Mhm.
better answer. I said glucose would be fine as well, but I really the connections you made are what's powerful. So yeah,
That's
it's been a very good experience holistically. Not only how do I set kids up for success in terms of what's the target. It's a planning tool, right? So it helps me. Yeah, I always say I tell the kids. Well, it's funny. A quick sidebar. Yesterday we did a check in, and one of the students put herself at a 2 and ended up scoring at a
yes.
4. And I always give them a hard time for that. I'm like, were you just like shooting low, hoping to? And she said, well,
Right.
no, we've only been doing this for 2 days. So then I'm like, okay, when
Mhm.
everybody finished this, I want to stop for a sec. I think time is a factor here. I said, like, this is an intention that's supposed to cover 1 to 2 hours. So I said,
Right.
at the end of 1 to 2 hours, I expect that you know all this. And some of them were like, oh yeah, for sure we know. And some of them that was an aha, right? Like they were waiting for
Right.
like, where are the rest of the, like, we have 4 more days on this topic. And it's like, no, we maybe have 4 more days in the
Yes.
unit or 5 more days, but we will have a new learning intention starting tomorrow. And so that was really cool. So then that, like, it affects your planning. It's affected my feedback. It's affected how I assess when I'm laying out
Mhm.
my exam. The kids are always like, how many questions is it going to be? And I'll say to them, what do you think's fair? And they're right
Yeah.
away, it depends. Like the other day, a big win was, it depends. Are they all going to be level fives, or are you going to throw us some level twos? And I said,
That's an interesting conversation.
for sure, you're going to get some level twos. And then one student who was quite
Yeah.
funny and quite sharp said, what about a couple of level ones? And of course, level one is, what's your opinion and what do you already know? So
Yes. Yeah.
pretty hard to get that question wrong. But yeah, recognizing. So then the flip off of that is we get to talk about cognitive load, right? And we talk about how one student said, I forgot the word meiosis and mitosis on that
Right.
question. And I said, yeah, but you showed me you knew it in the next one. So I said, like,
Yes.
they realized quickly that it's not a scorekeeping anymore. It's a, where are you in your learning? And so that
Yeah.
it makes it nicer for a student who sits down and is like, oh, I forgot to study that diagram, right? All good.
Mhm.
Show me you know that material somewhere else. So our last test, they had a question about where fertilization and implantation occurs.
Right.
A student was like, I totally forgot to study that, but I can tell you the process. And so they did. And in the process, they answered the question. Right. So,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Sometimes we get in our own way with our own blocks of I can't remember the word or like that. I know it's a hexagon. We used to talk, we would tell lots of stories in bio and it's compared to, it's like this. Students would be like, I remember it was at this part of the story that we told and it was this that's happening. And I'm like, yes, you have the process. And really, like you said, that word is Googleable. You could put it into AI. The important part is that you're pulling all of that together, that you're recognizing that you didn't know that, but I do know these pieces. I also like what you said. When you're looking at the exam, it's a moment in time that you're capturing, or whatever assessment tool that you're doing. That's just a moment in time. And because it's in this question or this part, doesn't mean it doesn't inform me on this. Because really, overall, I heard you say a couple of times, we're looking for whether you understand the outcome. And that's where we're assigning the mark at. Or like, do we have the different pieces of the outcome-based success criteria and you're able to pull those together using the level that the verb is indicating on that outcome? It's not so much about this is out of 3 marks and this is 10 marks. We might still use that sometimes to communicate where things are at or to track it, but we're really looking at that deeper understanding of how does it tie together and where are you at? How are you thinking about it? And how does that propel learning forward to keep going, to not just leave it and be done with it? And so I think that's a really interesting process. And I know you have to run here, and we were only just going to do a short podcast. But I think this is a really interesting conversation about assessment and how clarity helps us to better understand where we're at. And the tool that we're using is, again, and we'll just do a quick review and refresh here because I know you have to head off to your next class. When we, like in Saskatchewan, we have the outcome from the Ministry of Education. And so we know that that's large. We have indicators from that. In the Northeast, we've developed the rubrics, which have narrowed it down kind of to those must do, can't fails. And we're working on outcome-based success criteria, which we see as kind of the bigger picture. In this outcome, these would be the things that as a teacher, we've agreed division-wide that we are looking for some of that consistency. Now, the challenge is sometimes there's a lot of things packed into the indicators and a lot of things we've pulled into that one outcome-based success criteria, which is part of the journey towards that overall outcome. The tool that you're referencing, Clarify Ed, helps us to take that. And then you talked about breaking it down even more because sometimes that outcome-based success criteria might take 3 or 4 days, and you really want to narrow in on a part of that. So the tool can help us to narrow that down. And I think if we could jump into that conversation, just a little bit of how that narrows down the learning intention, and also just how in that process of narrowing it down, it helps us to make better connections in where we're going and the feedback for our next steps. Plus, the check-in is more manageable because we don't want the check-in to be 40 minutes long. We want that feedback to be quick and ignite conversations with students. And so that can level up the next day's work and the next level of conversation. So let's end with just that kind of from the outcome to the outcome-based success criteria to turning that into a learning intention, but really using the tool to narrow that down. And then the tool helps provide the clarity pack and some quick feedback for students.
Yeah, so definitely the outcome is the broad, it gives us the depth and breadth. Like, how far am I going to
Mhm.
go? Science teachers, math teachers, we're famous for, we've got our pet projects and we want to go to the ends of the earth on a topic.
Yeah.
But, so what is the depth and breadth? And that's really been helpful as I do this process, because Clarity Ed is good, but it doesn't necessarily know that. It's in there, but so
Right.
that's still the piece of the teacher there is, we have to know it can give us a learning intention. And we still, as the teacher, have to go, oh no, that's a little bit beyond. As an example, I was doing some work on lipids, and it really wanted to dive into the effect on vitamin uptake, which is really interesting and great
Yes.
outside of the outcome, right? We
Right.
mentioned it as part of it. So then from there, you have your learning intention. And from that, the success criteria of how can I confidently, as a learner or as an assessor, know if they've reached that. And so that's kind of step one is you look at that outcome, that gives you the box. Within that box, you really start to narrow in. So what does it look like? So what do we
Mhm.
really want them to learn here? And then success criteria at the outcome level is how will we know? And from there, what Clarity Ed allows you to do is then what are the milestones on that journey? So that
Yes.
1 to 2 day journey point, the outcome we're working on right now is around macro and micronutrients. Well,
Right.
that's a big topic, but it gives me my boundaries. Within that, I have my learning intention, which is around my macronutrients. But then within that, there are 4 macronutrients. And so what does it look like? So we're going to do carbs, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And even within that, our structure and function, the same learning intention. And it varies. Like with carbohydrates, they are. With proteins,
Mhm.
I've separated it out a little bit. So we have a learning
Right.
intention around structure relating to function, in terms of the learning intention is that the shape of a protein dictates its function, right? So that's a
Right.
1 or 2 day learning intention. But then another one I've added on is like, what are the functions of proteins in the body? So it
It
really
turns out
can,
they're pretty important to our health.
yeah, absolutely. And but how do we break it down into a manageable piece for kids, right? 1 to 2 days, what can they possibly keep in their
Mhm.
brain? And the nice thing about the check-in tool, the first time I gave it to kids, they were like, we didn't have a chance to study. And I said, oh, like, this is that to me was
Yeah.
like, oh, we've gone too long. This was not a manageable, this was not right
Right.
sized, right? So yesterday when I gave them their check-in, that question did not come up. So
Right.
they knew, that's how I know it was right sized. They were like, okay. They also know that it's at the end of the 2 days, if you don't have it all, that's okay, but at least keep, where you are. So
Yeah.
definitely there's that natural flow where you start with what is the box I'm going to work in, and then what are we really learning here? And the what are we really learning is not only content, but it's also the why, right? So when we're learning about body systems, as an example, I mean, the outcome is huge. It's 5 body systems in
Right.
general. Within that, really, it's about cause and effect and working together. And so then your daily learning intentions become about structure, function, and connection, right? And that
Yes.
becomes repetitive, which is really powerful too. Is that,
Mhm.
again, when we're talking about hormones, right? We're talking about cause, effect over and over and over again. So the granular learning intentions that Clarity Ed provides really are those you have to, as an educator, say, could I achieve that in 1 to 2 hours? And if the
Yes.
answer is no, then we need to take that and maybe look at what the success criteria was. As a great example, if I were to put
Mhm.
in macronutrients, it will give me each of them as part. So it'll say I can list the structure and function of one macronutrient, such
Right.
as carbohydrates. I can do two, such as and you realize quickly, well, that's a multi-day outcome. So then I can
Yes.
just pick carbohydrates and then I can, so yeah.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a process. Clarity Ed helps because it will give you a really nice progression that then, and with the Clarity Pack, gives you some ideas of how to progress through that learning.
Yes, which is really what I've heard is really handy. There's vocabulary, you could simplify the vocabulary. There are if your students or and you could use the check-in tool as a pre-assessment and see where they're at. And then it does give suggestions for if your students are at a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And we should say that the numbers are not connected to any type of mark. We're not using the numbers
No.
to assign a score or anything like that. The numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 are simply a way for students to reflect on where they're at in that learning journey, not attached to marks. So it's really about focusing, it's good, great formative feedback. Any of the feedback that AI gives them is that formative piece of here's where you think you are and here's the evidence that you shared. And I might not have put it in the evidence. I might know that, but that's all part of the conversation and that interplay between teachers and students and using a tool to help move learning forward in that way. So I appreciate that you talked about right size. What is the right size for that? What is the outcome or the outcome-based success criteria? What is it actually looking for? And what does that free up time for us to let go of and really dig in and have those deeper conversations and move learning forward? So thank you for joining our short mini moment in that, which kind of turned into its own podcast episode. But thank you so much to Dan Mielke for sharing his journey with the Clarify Ed tool. We will be back during the year to check back in. We'll also come back to talk to Dan about his thinking classrooms in senior grades as well as in the middle years on a future episode. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dan. Any last things that we have missed that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, just the only thing I would say is learning intentions and success criteria. There's something that we can easily brush off as I do it or I think I do it. Really digging in. You'll know you've done it well if it changes not only how they're learning, how you're assessing, and how you're giving feedback. If it's not revolutionary, you probably haven't dug in as deep as you maybe could.
Yes. And we could probably do a whole episode just on learning intentions and success criteria and what's the point of those, because they really frame that learning. Maybe could you sum them up really quick, what a learning intention is? So if a viewer wasn't familiar with a learning intention and a success criteria, what's the purpose of a learning intention? Is that for the student or the teacher? Why do we talk about success criteria to go together in a lesson?
The learning intention is the destination. Where are we going with this ultimately at the end? And then the success criteria are, how do I know I'm continuing on the right track? Whether it's checkpoints or a progression. If you think of the intention as where am I going? The success criteria is how do I know I'm actually getting there?
And so great tools for students and teachers to use. Where are we going at the start of class, but not just the start. I heard you say that you reference them during and throughout the lesson over the course of the days, because we want to keep going back and reflecting on where am I at? Am I moving forward in that journey? And the success criteria give us something tangible to reference, right?
Absolutely.
When I leave class after 2 days, am I able to explain what a nucleotide is, or what's the function of a protein, or why does the shape of a protein matter? Those are all pieces that I can use as a student to check where I'm at in my journey. So then it's a team effort for learning and moving forward rather than, I wonder what the teacher will ask me tomorrow. We don't need to wonder about that. It's not a game. It's really about the learning and digging in and thinking more deeply, because the content 40 or 50 years down the road, we've already seen the science content evolve. It's really how we think about things, how we can problem solve. Those are all lifelong skills that will help us to become engaged citizens in the future. And I know you have to run there. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us on this episode of the podcast.
You betcha. Thanks, Debbie. Take care.
Dan's story reminds us that this work isn't about adding something new to an already full plate. It's about making the work we're already doing clearer, more focused, and more impactful. One of the key turning points Dan shared came after an exam where students performed exceptionally well. When he asked if it felt easy, the student said, "Yeah, but not because it was easy, because the review made it easy." That moment captured the ways Clarify Ed supported both teachers and students on their learning journey. Not shortcuts, not lowered expectations, but rather alignment. When learning intentions are clear and success criteria live on a continuum that students recognize themselves in, students move from guessing what matters to owning their learning. And feedback shifts from something students simply receive to something they use, fueling reflection, conversation, and meaningful next steps in learning. Throughout this conversation, we heard how clarity changed everything. Reviews shifted from passive studying to active dialogue. Students learned how to name what they know and what they're still working on. Assessment became less about point collecting and more about evidence of learning. And most importantly, students began to see themselves as capable, confident learners. This isn't about perfection or doing everything at once. It's about starting small, tightening a learning intention, sharpening success criteria, or using a check-in to spark deeper conversations. Each small shift builds student agency, confidence, and ownership over time. Wondering if this will make your work easier? Start here. Start by making learning visible. When students know the target and how to hit it, your role shifts from chasing understanding to responding to it. That's not more work. That's the work. That's the work that replaces, am I done? With here's my evidence, and here's where I'm headed next. Thanks for listening to Any Voices. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for joining our community of innovators and change makers. We hope the conversations and stories have ignited a spark within. We'd like to express our gratitude to our dedicated Northeast educators. Until next time, remember to subscribe to Any Voices and join us on the next episode as we share the stories of learning shaping our future. Thanks for listening.